I love the company, but as you know, they announced a few days ago that they're going to move a lot of their manufacturing business to Mexico. I'm just notifying John Deere right now. If you do that, we're putting a 200% tariff on everything that you want to sell into the United States. For over 100 years, John Deere stood as the symbol of American farming power. But everything changed overnight in a move no one saw coming. John Deere quietly outsourced thousands of American manufacturing jobs overseas, cutting costs but shattering trust. That decision didn't just shake rural communities, it triggered a political firestorm. President Trump took the stage, vowing revenge, threatening massive tariffs, and accusing John Deere of betraying American workers. But the real shock was that this corporate gamble exposed a much bigger crisis, one that could tear apart the entire farming economy. So, how did America's most trusted brand fall from grace? Why did Trump declare an all-out war on John Deere? And, most importantly, what happens next for American farmers? What's happening? President Donald Trump wasted no time responding to what he called a total betrayal of American farmers and workers. At a rally in Des Moines, Iowa, just 1 week after John Deere's outsourcing announcement, Trump took the stage and dropped a political bombshell that sent shockwaves through the business world. He declared that if John Deere continued to manufacture tractors, harvesters, and other equipment outside the United States, he would impose a 200% tariff on every product they imported back into America. The crowd erupted in applause, chanting "America First," as Trump doubled down on his economic nationalism. This was not just about one company, this was about sending a message to corporate America. Trump accused John Deere of abandoning the very farmers who had built the company's fortune. He called their move a slap in the face to every American worker who wears boots, works the land, and feeds the world. The tariff threat was designed to force John Deere to reverse its decision and bring production back home. But it also risked igniting a broader economic crisis. Business leaders warned that such aggressive tariffs could backfire, leading to higher equipment prices, disrupted supply chains, and retaliatory trade measures from countries where John Deere was expanding its operations. But Trump was undeterred. He framed the tariff as a test of loyalty. Either corporations stood with American workers or they would pay the price. As Trump's words echoed across the nation, rural America found itself at the center of a political war. But it wasn't just politicians and CEOs who were fighting. On the ground, a revolt was brewing among the very people John Deere and Trump claimed to represent. This is just the tip of the iceberg. If you want the full story, make sure you're subscribed and ready, because it's about to get a whole lot worse. The farmer revolt. While Wall Street debated tariffs and corporate strategy, rural America erupted in fury. Farmers across Iowa, Nebraska, and Indiana, who had spent decades loyal to the John Deere brand, now felt abandoned. Social media lit up with photos of angry farmers spray painting over John Deere logos, videos of tractors being parked in protest outside shuttered factories, and viral hashtags like #DeerDisloyal. This was not just economic outrage, it was personal. For generations, John Deere had been part of rural America's identity. Its green and yellow machines represented self-reliance, hard work, and American values. Now, many farmers felt like the company had sold them out to foreign interests. Local farm cooperatives and rural chambers of commerce called emergency meetings. Some farmers openly questioned whether they would ever buy John Deere equipment again. Others organized boycotts, vowing to purchase machinery from smaller American manufacturers, even if it meant paying more. The protests weren't just symbolic. John Deere dealerships reported plummeting sales, particularly in regions hardest hit by factory closures. Farmers who once waited months for new John Deere equipment now walked away from showrooms empty-handed. The revolt spread beyond the fields into small-town coffee shops, local newspapers, and town hall meetings as rural America's anger boiled over. John Deere executives scrambled to contain the fallout. They issued statements defending their decision, citing global competition and rising costs, but the farmers were not listening. For them, it wasn't about corporate spreadsheets, it was about betrayal. John Deere's next move would determine whether they could salvage their reputation or lose rural America forever. John Deere's defense. Faced with public outrage, political pressure, and crumbling consumer trust, John Deere launched a counteroffensive. In press conferences, CEO John May defended the outsourcing strategy as a necessary evolution to survive in an increasingly competitive global marketplace. He argued that the company's survival depended on adapting to economic realities. To soften the blow, John Deere announced a series of new investments in American agriculture. The company pledged to invest $500 million in precision farming technologies. Promising to make American farmers the most productive and profitable in the world, they introduced a new line of fully autonomous tractors and drones designed to reduce labor costs and maximize crop yields at the same time. Deere promised to maintain and expand several research and development centers within the United States. They framed these moves as proof of their continued commitment to American agriculture, even if production was shifting overseas, but not everyone was convinced. Critics accused John Deere of using technology as a smokescreen, distracting from the devastating impact of factory closures and job losses. Farmers questioned whether these high-tech investments would actually benefit small family farms or merely serve corporate interests. As the debate raged on, one thing became clear: John Deere's strategy had ignited a political, economic, and cultural firestorm that could not be easily contained. While Deere fought to defend itself, the political storm was only getting started. Trump's allies strike back. The moment President Donald Trump launched his war against John Deere, his political allies wasted no time turning the company's decision into a national movement. It was no longer just about tractors, tariffs, or corporate strategy. For Trump's Republican allies, it became a cultural and political crusade. Conservative media outlets, right-wing commentators, and politicians quickly rallied behind Trump, painting John Deere's outsourcing move as the ultimate betrayal of American workers and rural communities. The narrative was simple but powerful. John Deere, a company built on the backs of American farmers and factory workers, had abandoned the very people who made it great. Fox News, talk radio hosts, and conservative influencers amplified this message across the country. Rural rallies erupted in states like Iowa, Ohio, and Kansas. Trump-supporting farmers and factory workers marched in protest, holding signs that read, "Deere sold us out" and "America first, not China first." Republican lawmakers followed Trump's lead, introducing legislation aimed at punishing corporations that outsourced American jobs. They flooded social media with hashtags like #DeerDisloyal and #FarmersBetrayed. The backlash was swift, coordinated, and relentless. John Deere found itself the face of a broader debate about corporate loyalty and economic nationalism. But this political weaponization wasn't about solving economic problems, it was about winning the narrative. Conservative leaders knew that channeling rural anger into political capital could help them secure votes in the upcoming election. They turned Deere's crisis into a battle for America's soul, pitting Main Street against Wall Street, farmers against globalists. Yet, while Trump and his allies fanned the flames, the economic fire was already spreading beyond politics. What started as outrage soon evolved into something far more devastating for rural America: how Deere's crisis shook rural America. The backlash against John Deere wasn't just a political spectacle, it triggered a brutal economic collapse across rural America. The company's decision to move parts of its manufacturing overseas set off a chain reaction that devastated entire communities built around John Deere factories and supply chains. In factory towns from Moline, Illinois, to Waterloo, Iowa, the consequences were immediate. Thousands of workers were laid off, and local businesses that relied on Deere employees, restaurants, grocery stores, hardware shops, saw their revenues plummet. Once thriving neighborhoods quickly transformed into economic ghost towns. The ripple effect spread fast. Construction companies halted projects, trucking firms canceled orders, and suppliers of steel, rubber, and electronic components saw demand dry up overnight. Every layoff, every shuttered storefront added to the downward spiral. For rural families, the impact was devastating. Many had spent generations working for John Deere, believing their jobs were secure. Suddenly, they found themselves without paychecks, benefits, or hope. Mortgage defaults spiked, local banks reported rising loan delinquencies, and charitable food banks saw record demand. Community leaders scrambled to respond, but the damage was too widespread. Rural schools, already underfunded, faced budget cuts as local tax revenues dried up. Health clinics closed, and entire towns fell into crisis mode. This wasn't just a corporate controversy anymore, it was a full-blown economic emergency, one that exposed how deeply rural America depended on John Deere. But as the economic pain intensified, another battle was brewing. One fought not in factories or fields, but on television screens and social media feeds, the media war. While rural America struggled to survive the economic fallout, the media war over John Deere's betrayal exploded. The press turned the crisis into a cultural battlefield, dividing the country even further. But this fight wasn't about facts, it was about framing. Conservative media painted John Deere as the latest villain in a long list of corporate traitors. Fox News ran nightly segments accusing the company of abandoning American workers. Right-wing radio hosts called for boycotts and protests. Social media platforms were flooded with videos of Trump supporters smashing John Deere merchandise. On the other side, left-leaning outlets framed the crisis differently. They argued that Trump's tariff policies, not John Deere's corporate strategy, were to blame for the economic collapse. MSNBC and CNN ran segments highlighting how Trump's trade war had pushed Deere into an impossible corner. They interviewed economists who warned that protectionism would only make things worse. The result was a media circus where neither side told the full story. Facts were cherry-picked, outrage was manufactured, and rural families caught in the middle found themselves reduced to political props in a national shouting match. Meanwhile, the real victims, the workers, the farmers, the small business owners, were left to navigate the wreckage alone. And while America argued over who was to blame, the crisis was quietly spreading beyond its borders. The global market shock, which started as a local controversy, quickly spiraled into an international economic shockwave. Investors, trade partners, and foreign governments watched in alarm as the American agricultural giant stumbled. International news outlets picked up the story, framing it as a sign of deeper instability in the American economy. Financial markets reacted swiftly. Deere's stock price plunged on Wall Street, wiping out billions of dollars in market value. Global agricultural companies saw their shares tumble as investors braced for wider fallout. In Canada, Brazil, and Europe's agricultural hubs, farmers and manufacturers prepared for disruption. John Deere's supply chain was global, and its collapse threatened to upend the international trade network. Orders were cancelled, contracts renegotiated, and global suppliers scrambled to find new buyers. China, already emerging as a major competitor in agricultural machinery, seized the opportunity. Chinese manufacturers began aggressively courting former John Deere customers, offering lower prices and more stable supply chains. Countries that once relied on American farming equipment started looking east. What began as a corporate decision in the United States had triggered a realignment of the global agricultural market. Investors, farmers, and governments around the world were now caught in the crossfire. But while the international markets reacted, neither Trump nor John Deere realized how global forces would soon hijack their fight and reshape the very future of American farming. China's silent attack. While American politicians were busy trading insults and slapping tariffs on one another, China was quietly executing a masterstroke strategy that reshaped the global farming market. It did not happen overnight, it was not loud, and it was not front-page news, but by the time Washington and John Deere realized what had happened, it was too late. For years, China invested heavily in its domestic agricultural machinery industry while American farmers remained loyal to traditional brands like John Deere. China slowly flooded global markets with cheaper, good-enough alternatives. Brands that American farmers had barely heard of began showing up at auction houses, online platforms, and even local dealerships at a fraction of the cost of a new John Deere machine. China's strategy was simple but devastating. Rather than engage in a public trade war, Beijing subsidized its agricultural manufacturing sector. Chinese companies received generous loans, tax breaks, and state-backed research funding. Their goal was to undercut American equipment prices by 30 to 50%, and it worked. American farmers, struggling under soaring production costs, could not ignore the price difference. By 2026, Chinese-made tractors, harvesters, and precision agriculture tools had captured nearly 35% of the global farming equipment market. Even in the United States, their presence surged, especially in struggling rural areas where every dollar mattered. American farmers who once swore by John Deere's green and yellow colors were now opting for Chinese brands out of necessity, not loyalty. This silent attack was not about tariffs, it was about strategic patience, state intervention, and a calculated understanding of how economic pain would eventually shift American farmers' buying decisions. By the time Washington realized the scale of China's success, the American farming equipment market had already changed forever. How Trump's tariffs backfired on American farmers. The price war that erupted following President Trump's tariffs was supposed to protect American workers, but in the fields of rural America, it accomplished the opposite. It crushed the very farmers those policies claimed to defend. When the Trump administration imposed 25% tariffs on Canadian and Mexican imports and increased tariffs on Chinese and European goods, the immediate effect was rising costs for corporations like John Deere. But the long-term and most devastating effect fell squarely on America's farmers. Farmers operate on thin margins, every cent counts when you are trying to keep a farm running. The new tariffs triggered a domino effect. Imported fertilizers, machinery parts, and even animal feed prices skyrocketed. Tractor prices increased by over 15% within 6 months, and fuel costs spiked due to